All right. Well, we are so glad that you're joining us. My name is Michael Dupin, and I am here with, I'll let you say your name.
Jalen Seawright.
And Jalen is actually in the Bay Area right now with us, but you're coming from Detroit.
Yeah.
And we actually worked at the same church outside of Detroit before Clint and I moved here to California. We've been here a little over 4 years, but we never worked together.
No, we were passing each
Yeah,
other.
you
It's
came in as we were leaving.
right.
But it has been really cool. We've gotten to know you over the last couple years. And then in this online season, in this COVID season, you've kind of been a part of Easttown and
Yeah.
been leading worship for us at different times. But we're just going to talk today because I want you to get to know Jalen and what he's doing. He is doing some incredible things right now. We know that this has been a year of great division in our country. This has been a year of a lot of pain when it comes to the racial injustice that has always been there,
Yeah.
but is at the forefront now. And in getting to know you and then watching you from a distance, have just seen the way that you're being used and your creativity and the way that God is using you. And so we're going to hear a little bit more of your story this morning. So talk to us a little bit about where you grew up, your family growing up. Give us some background.
Yeah. So like I was born like in Detroit, but quickly moved to Pontiac. I think I was like 2, and Pontiac is just a city. It's about 20 minutes north of Detroit. Predominantly black city. So I spent I think we moved from Pontiac when I was about 13. And that move was really interesting because then at 13, I moved from Pontiac, predominantly black, to a city called Oxford, which was even further north than Pontiac, and it was predominantly white. So I was like one of 6 African Americans in the school I went to.
What was that transition like for you you said age 13?
Yeah. It was tough. I mean, I would say it was probably maybe even a little tougher I've got 2 younger sisters.
Okay.
I think for me it was tough just because I never engaged with racial, tension in that way. And I wouldn't say, I mean, I definitely dealt with straight up racism, but I would say most of it was around like, what do people do with people that aren't like them? That was the tension that I engaged with. And at 13, I mean, what 13-year-old isn't awkward,
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
how do I make
And you
it
could recognize that right away when you
100%.
moved. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. There were lots of circumstances that led me to believe that interactions between myself and law enforcement, interactions between myself and friends' parents, all kinds of things let me know that I was much different than what was the majority there.
Yeah. And I just think even through this past year, I think for me personally, I'm just like still dumbfounded by how hard it is for all of us to be with people that are different than us, or to know how to really listen to stories and kind of experience or listen to the experiences of others. And so I just think, that had to be crazy at 13, moving to a completely different area where all of a sudden that's in your face more than it ever has been before.
Totally.
Talk about, I know that your family has great connections to the civil rights movement, and I know there's a really cool story about you even sitting in school one day. Can you talk about that story a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like 10th or 11th grade, and so like I'm falling asleep in my history class just like any other high school kid, and we're watching. Peter Jennings had this show called The Century, where like History Channel would take through like periods of 5 to 10 years and do an hour-long documentary on what was happening at that time in the century. And so it got to one of the videos was on the civil rights movement, and our history teacher decided to show it to us. And one of the first things they started out talking about was Senator John Lewis and the sit-in movement, and the way that he, along with other students, integrated the segregated lunch counters there in Nashville. And my grandfather, I'd always heard and known that he was a part of that. But I'm sitting in history class, and I'm kind of just between falling asleep and looking up, and I see my grandfather. And like in the video, and I jump up and I'm like, "That's my grandfather!" And the teacher's like, "Yeah, whatever, shut up, sit down, pay attention," kind of thing. So
did your teacher believe you at least?
Well, after I had to convince him that I was right, I was kind of I was always pulling jokes in school, so I didn't blame him for not believing me. But afterwards, I was like, hey, I'm serious. That was my grandfather. He believed me, and I was able to take the VHS tape home. And so I took the VHS tape home, and I plugged it into the VCR, and
VHS and VCR, that's going to be
if anybody knows what that is. Right. I plug it into the thing that plays those old tapes. And I asked my mom, I think she was either like, I don't know what she was doing. And I said, hey, this is my grandfather? She's like, yep. And just like, I'm like, hey, yo, nobody wanted to tell me? He's like, like there's film surrounding this or whatever else. But yeah, he was part of one of the first group of students from Tennessee State University to integrate, the lunch counters, segregated lunch counters there in Nashville. And he was heavily involved with Senator John Lewis. And actually, the reason why why we moved to Detroit, or my mom's side of the family moved to Detroit, was because he kind of got ran out of town there in Tennessee. Yeah.
Wow. What was it like for you to see him that day? Like, as you're falling asleep, like, what did that do to see him on film, like you're talking about?
I think it inspired me. I think a lot of that kind of influenced even like my passion in some of these discussions, because it's different when you hear about it. You're told, well, you had a grandfather, he did this, and my grandfather, he's still living. I was actually I talk to him quite regularly about this kind of stuff. Awesome. And but the thing is like when you see it, and when you see like those moments in history where people acted with such courage and bravery, and I mean, I've asked him time and time again, like, weren't you scared? And he's like, heck yeah, I was scared. I was like, well, why'd you do it? And it was because, he says, because I knew that you would come along one day, and I wanted you to be able to eat where you wanted to eat. And it's like, you would risk your life for that, And so for me, what it did for me is it challenged me to be more courageous, to say like, hey, this life is more than just about me, and that there are places of justice. There are things that need to be stepped into. There are places of injustice, I should say, that need to be stepped into. And it's going to take courageous groups of people to step up and do what people like my grandfather did in the past. So it's really challenged me,
Yeah, that's an incredible legacy. And I still remember a conversation. I don't remember if we were on the phone or on Zoom, and it was Clint and I, my husband, and we were talking to you and Kiana, your wife. Yeah. And we were talking about, you were saying something, I don't remember our conversation, but you were saying, yeah, I'm not really a risk taker. Yeah. And as you talk about courage, I remember Clint and I saying that night, like, what you're doing right now, the conversations that you're having, what you're stepping into with your creativity is actually huge risk with everything that's going on in our country. But now I hear your story of your grandfather, and I'm like, this is your legacy. Yeah. And this is what has been passed down to you, which is really incredible that you're stepping right into that.
I was watching on the plane ride here. I was watching a documentary. They had something on John Lewis, and
did you see your grandfather again?
I didn't see him again. Right. I was looking though. I was like, they had something on him, and a prominent black journalist had interviewed him and kind of walked him through his ancestry, and he found a voting card of Senator John Lewis's great-grandfather, where after Reconstruction, where black men were allowed to go and vote, he actually stepped in and was the first person in his family line that they could determine was able to vote. And between his great-grandfather and him, there had been no one else who was able to vote. And John Lewis simply responded with, it must be in my blood. Yeah. And so for me, that's what I see when I see my grandfather. I said, well, this must be in my blood.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I believe that. Yeah. That's amazing. Well, talk about, I just mentioned Kiana, but talk about a little bit about your family. Yeah. Because it's been fun for us to watch them from a distance, but now getting to know them a little bit more. But talk about that.
Yeah. So Kiana and I, we started dating at 14.
Which I told my 13-year-old son this morning, don't get any ideas. It's not happening. Right. We were talking about that.
It's crazy to think, like, when I look at your 13-year-old son, I'm like, wow, like in 1 year, he'll be the age that I found, my wife. But trust me, we had no clue that we were going to end up, married. Yeah. But, and together, we have two daughters, Carrington, who is 3, and Cadence, who is 2. They're 15 months apart. And, they're a lot of fun and a lot of work, but it's been great with them. And so like, I would say that like one thing we've really been intentional about, like over the course of this past year, is just making sure that our girls are confident and proud of their skin color. Understand that like it is beautiful, it is who they are, and it is who God has designed them to be. And so like in this month in February, we've really been stepping into teaching them more and more about where they come from.
And you've been really creative. So tell us what you've been doing. You have to see these girls and you have to follow them. But I want to know was this your idea?
Yeah. So
really cool.
Kiana and I, we were kind of up late one night. We're always up super late. But, and I was saying, okay, what's a creative way to teach a 3 and 2-year-old to start teaching them about Black history? And the interesting thing is like so many people were like, they don't get it. They're too young or things like that. But I was like, no, I grew up engaging with it pretty young. I think around like 3 or 4. And so I wanted to make sure, I said, well, let's start by doing something fun and creative. So we thought through crafts and things like that. And there's so much Black history in Detroit, in the Detroit area, whether it's through music, civil rights movement, I mean, all kinds of stuff. Detroit is rich in African-American history. So we started by, I said, I want to teach them about women, Black women that conquered, you know? And so I said, let's make up this list of Black women that we're going to teach them about, and we'll come up with a craft. Then I took it a step further and said, let's dress them up as these characters because it could be cool. They love getting dressed and things like that. So we did that. And then I took a step further and I was like, let's dress them up and go to these places that are open, like these museums in the Detroit area and stuff like that. So we did Rosa Parks as the first one. And in Detroit is the actual bus. They found it and restored it. That Rosa Parks sat on. And so we said, let's take the girls down there dressed as Rosa Parks to make the connection between the craft that they did and the bus that Rosa sat on. And so we did that. And so it kind of became this thing. And next thing you know, it's picked up by the news. And then it goes from local news to national news. Now magazines are picking it up.
And now people are like, when is the next one coming?
And so I was like, oh, man, I didn't know that we were going to have to do this the entire month. But it looks like we're on a new kind of journey.
Well, it's amazing because I love how you're passing down the legacy. And I have now met your girls, and they are going to conquer. Like, they are amazing. But you're also teaching. I don't know if you realize the impact that you would have, and you're teaching so many others. Like, you're talking about local news and national news, and I've watched people that are following you, and it's like everyone that's following you is learning right now, which is an incredible gift, I think, to this time and space in our world. And to think that that anybody can see and to learn from what you just decided to do because you want your girls to know. And so I think it's, you have to, they're the cutest pictures. And I am too, kind of like, let's go. When's the next one?
The next one? Right.
Every day. Who you guys have done? Rosa Parks, Amanda Gorman. The astronaut, was it Mae?
Mae Jemison.
And then the boxer from the Olympics.
Clarissa Shields.
Yes. And I saw Clarissa Shields commented on it.
Yeah, it's crazy because it's like the biggest thing I wanted to do was I wanted to do like then and now. So it's like Rosa Parks is someone that like made it possible for women like Amanda Gorman to be where she is. So I want them to see the connection early, that it's like there are people that do things that lay the groundwork so that people like you can conquer, And so I want them to be in this sweet spot in the middle of like being confident and grateful, understanding that these opportunities. So it's like Clarissa Shields, Amanda Gorman, those are 2 people that are conquering right now, and they're killing it. And so it's amazing, but it's only because of the people like Mae Jemison and Rosa Parks.
That's amazing. That's so cool. All right, so this is what I love. It's like I think for a lot of us, maybe we get stuck and know that this is a real problem, and we want to see healing. We want to see racial justice. We don't know exactly what to do. And I just keep coming back to this, like, we're all going to do it differently, right? We're all created differently. And I think getting creative like you did, like, what are my unique gifts and how can I start this in a simple way? And it might not blow up nationally, like what any of us are doing. But you also love to cook, love to bake. I'm getting your cinnamon rolls tomorrow, I believe. I'm very excited about this. But talk about what you're doing with that aspect of your life.
Yeah. So like I call myself like I'm an at-home, novice chef or whatever else. Like, but I just love to cook, you know. And one thing I've noticed is like even in being able to travel around to a few places is like food always is an explanation of heritage. Like it can be used as a catalyst to create conversation that leads to knowledge and intimacy within relationships. And so it's like you want to know something about someone's culture, most oftentimes you start with the food.
Yeah.
And so I am a person that's like, okay, I can sit and talk about the problems all day, you know, and we can debate whether there is validity to the way I view the problems or the way you view the problems or where we disagree. But at the end of the day, very little comes from that. If we get to the end of the day and we're sitting here and we're like, okay, we agree on everything, nothing's really changed.
Yeah.
You know? But it's like, how can we be proactive that say, like, even if I don't see it the same way as other people, right, how can I step into it and still amass change? And so for me, it's like, I think that takes relationship and people coming into contact and stepping into understanding other people's point of view, other people's culture, their stories, their backgrounds. And so I said, let me marry these conversations that I'm really, you know, passionate about and cooking. And so I decided to kind of come up with this idea where I was like, hey, let's do this kind of show idea called 350 for 30, where like I invite a guest into a kitchen with me who's from a diverse background and is passionate about reconciliation. And we cook something together that explains and represents them and their culture and their heritage. And as it's cooking, we have a conversation about reconciliation and the ways that they are advancing it within, you know, the world. And so it's kind of something right now. We've got a pilot together and we're just kind of trying to see who wants it, if anybody likes it, or what we need to do with it.
All right. I want you to talk about what do you do with people that don't believe like you? Because I love what you're saying. It's like, we can have these conversations all day long and just get to the point where either we know we don't agree or maybe we agree on everything. Like, what do you do when there's someone, maybe it's someone that is really important to you, or maybe it's someone, you know, that's just connecting with you. Like, what do you do when people don't agree with you or believe like you?
At first, I get really upset. No,
good. Honesty's good.
But no, I'd say like, I think for me, it's like, sometimes it depends on what we're disagreeing on. If I'm sitting up here and I'm disagreeing about the fact that like African Americans or people that are non-white are human, like I mean, I'm gonna have a different approach to how I deal with you. But if we're debating things like terms and stuff like that, I think there's still a way to activate those kinds of people. So it's like, where's our commonality first? I'm always looking for commonality. So it's like, hey, you have an issue with me using terms like white privilege. Okay. All right, you know what? I'll shelf that right there. But can you sit down and can we come to a place where we say, hey, something is wrong and something needs to change? Most people are like, well, yeah, that's why we're having this conversation, you know? But it's like, where can I find commonality with you, even though we may not agree on things that, you know, directly affect me, you know? And so a lot of it is like, I think it's constant like reframing and like understanding what God's vision is for building his kingdom. And I constantly have to remind myself that no part of it is about my own self-advancement or how good I feel about myself. And so for me, it's like, yes, someone may be dismissing me and my heritage as a black man, right? But advancing the kingdom isn't about me anyways. But it's about people seeing and reconciling towards each other. I think the whole gospel is centered around, you know, humanity reconciling to itself, first to God and then itself. So my thing is, I think that's like Ephesians 2 and 3. It sets it up great. It's like, hey, reconciliation starts like, how does humanity as creation is groaning, you know, how do we reconcile to God and then to each other? And so to me, it's like sometimes your feelings get hurt in that reconciliation process. And it's been me, okay, how do I not take that personal and love anyways? Even though this person doesn't see me as their equal, even though this person doesn't understand how their view or even the way they operate within the world negatively affects marginalized minority groups, you know, I still believe there's a way that they can step into kingdom with me, you know? So that's kind of how I've been doing it. It's a lot of examination and trying not to take things too personal.
That has to be hard though, because everything I hear you saying has to take so much energy to remove yourself, to keep, like you talked about, sometimes I have to reframe the conversation or the phrases that I'm using. It's like, how do you keep that energy up, especially if you're having a conversation with someone that you're saying, like, they don't see you as equal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the thing for me is it's hard because, like, I always say it like this is like there's always a sticker that tells you how much something costs. You know, you go to the store, it's got a sticker on it that says like this is $5.99 or whatever else. And so, like, there's a cost to reconciliation as well. There's a cost to the lack of reconciliation too. And when you don't reconcile, the cost, the sticker, it's not a price, it's someone's face. And so for me, it's like a lot of the times it's hard to remove yourself because on that sticker, sometimes I see Carrington and Cadence.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes I see myself. And so it gets difficult because it's like, sometimes you just want to shake people and say, if you don't get this, it's going to cost my girls. It's going to cost me. But the thing is, like, it's this balance between trusting that God's got me, trusting that God's got us. And so it can get difficult because at times it gets dark. At times it gets dark because you're asking people to engage and see you. It's not like you're debating like whether this tax reform act or whatever else.
Right.
But when you get into conversations revolving around equity and racial reconciliation, the cost is always it's always going to be on the minority. It seems to be, it's difficult.
Is there ever a point that you come to and you feel like in a conversation or in a relationship, like this can't be reconciled, at least for now?
I think the thing is like I never give up on the hope of reconciliation because I think that it only happens through the power of the Holy Spirit, the power of Christ. I think that so I don't think I'll ever be able to, as much as sometimes I feel that way, I don't think I'll ever be able to say that I believe reconciliation is impossible from a large picture narrative. Do I think there are going to be people along the way who aren't part of that reconciliation process? 100%.
Yeah.
100%. And sometimes, like, that gets frustrating. It's like, and so, like, I do think that sometimes it's like even Jesus, like, he says when he sent the disciples, he says, if you go into a town and they don't hear what you have to say, dust your sandals off and move on to the next one. And so the thing is like, it's those moments where sometimes you just don't want to dust your sandals off. Yeah. And you're like, but for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of the kingdom, you've got to keep moving,
Yeah, I look at what you're doing and I think you're right. Like, I just see God working through you and God giving you the ability to stay in these conversations, to keep pushing for what you see in the future. Like, you have such an ability to not only see the future that your girls could experience, but to communicate that of like both how you can be a part of affecting that change and how others can be. Like, it's so inspiring. But I would just imagine, like you said, it can get really dark.
Yeah.
What do you do in those dark times? Like, I've heard you talk a little bit about how important it is, the people that you retreat with. What does that look like in your life?
I mean, just being fully vulnerable. There have been moments where it's been like, some of these conversations just knock the wind out of you, especially for me, it's when you, like, kind of like I just, talked about in the message on Sunday. It's like there are these moments where, you feel unseen, or moments where you thought you knew someone, but you didn't, and you realize that you aren't as valuable as you thought you were, or maybe what you did was more valuable, And so the thing is it's like, it's hard to have those kinds of conversations. And these are with, like, at times with long-term friends, know? One thing I can say is like, for like faith communities like that I've been a part of, it's been a beautiful journey, like with leaders and pastors and working alongside, but stepping into, like, after you leave the leadership and you step into boots on the ground kind of conversations, that's where it gets dark. So I really realized probably about 6 or 7 months ago that I need a community of people that I can run to, people of wisdom, people who love me dearly, who will encourage me and challenge me. And so, like, I've got a community of some men and women who have walked this path longer than I have. They're older than I am. They're way more seasoned and knowledgeable in these kinds of conversations. And I just kind of sit at their feet, every chance I get. Sometimes I go to them to heal. I've been really wounded or hurt by somebody's comment. I go to them, and sometimes they say, suck it up, keep moving. Other times they say, hey, you need to take a break. Other time they say, like, hey, I think that you're so hurt right now, you're hurting your own family, And so there's so much to this conversation. It's like, having that group of people, I think no matter what you're doing in whatever kind of ministry or thing you're a part of, you need those people, And so for me, that group of people is kind of they're my sounding board. They're where I find healing. They're the people that I think are like, Jesus sent to me to cover me in a lot of ways. A lot of times I'll just text them and say, pray for me, and they will.
Yeah, because I know in your story, even just in these last few months, that there's been hurt and there's been pain. And I think to put yourself like at the feet of others, like you said, is it's something that you have to have humility to be able to do. But also it's such a gift, I believe, to you and your family, for you to be able to have other people kind of see from the outside. Because I do think sometimes, I think this can be such a hard conversation. This can be such a hard journey to go down, especially when you're saying like, it's costing my girls, like if this doesn't change. And if you try to approach this on your own, like I can't imagine how dark and defeating it would feel often. And so that's such a gift to have those people around you.
It's been a huge blessing. And the other thing is like, the other side of it is like when it gets dark, I believe like Jesus reminds me a lot of like what I'm always encouraged by is like how many people that aren't black, how many white leaders there are advocating for the things that I'm passionate about. So I had just the privilege and opportunity to be able to work alongside so many pastors and things like that, I mean, just like you and Clint, like that are doing things like that matter and matter. And I'm so encouraged by that kind of stuff. So also paying attention to those stories when things get dark and saying like, wow, there are people all the way out there in the Bay Area, loving local and doing these things and supporting, people of color and their businesses and things like that. And then even in the Metro Detroit area, there are initiatives that these churches are working on and things like that. Is like, I think the kingdom is moving. And so even though those conversations might be discouraging at times, it's always good to kind of keep your head up and say, well, you can focus on that, but also look at what God is doing.
Yeah, that's so good, because I know we all look at this last year and we're like, there's been so much that we could point to that is wrong, that is hurtful, that is terrible. But then, to be able to see the things of like people are stepping into this conversation that maybe never have before. And what could happen if we just continue to take those steps and we stay faithful to what God might be opening our eyes to, even though it's been there for a long time. What do you think, like, as you mentioned, faith communities and the pastors that you've been able to walk beside, and even the struggle of, like you said, when your boots on the ground, like, that can be difficult. How important do you think the church is to building bridges to racial reconciliation? Like, what would you say to people even right now that are following Jesus, are a part of a faith community, but maybe haven't even taken steps into this? Like, how important are we to it?
Yeah, I would say that it is impossible without it, and the reason why I say it is like, you all talked about this last week where you were talking about what are you building your house on, and I think reconciliation being the center, of God's plan for creation, it's like whatever house of reconciliation, you're building, the foundation has to be in Christ in order for it to last. And so I think the church is the only entity, right, that has the key to that kind of foundation. So I think there's so much, like when I look around, I'm like, oh, it's great that things are changing within laws. It's great that things, but like as we know, like at times, like certain leaders have even said that like as history becomes further history, right, some of the achievements of the past erode. You know, you can undo and change a law or find out that one part of it wasn't right and amend it and all kinds of things. We've seen that happen in the past 5-10 years to even like the Voting Rights Act, you know? And so the stuff like that it's interesting to have those kind of conversations, but it's like knowing that like things of this world will fade, you know, no matter what. Kingdoms come, kingdoms go. But it's like the gospel, it lasts forever. And so for me, the church is the only answer to true, lasting, real reconciliation, because that is God's plan, you know?
And do you have hope for what you see right now?
I do. I have a lot of hope. I'm very hopeful. Do I think that like I will live to see like a world where there's equity and everybody loves each other and there's no racism? Well, no, I think that is a brokenness that will continue to plague our world till the end of time, you know, because one thing we like to do as people is divide ourselves. Yeah. And so I think that's just a plague of our separation from God. But I do believe Scripture when it says creation is groaning. Paul says that. It's like when creation is groaning and it's moving towards each other. So I think, like Dr. King said, there's this long arc, but he believes it bends towards justice. I believe the same thing. While I don't know what point of the arc I'm on. I know it's further than where Dr. King was, you know, because of his sacrifice and giving his life, the arc of justice turned even more. And so I think that this arc, I don't know where exactly I am on the line of it, but I know what it's bending towards. Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, last question, I think. And you've touched on this a little bit, but Sunday you spoke for Easttown. If you have not listened to that message, and you just talked about we're talking about this whole conversation of it's complicated, and you talked about that it's complicated with others in our relationship, especially right now. So you can go on our website, you can go to YouTube and find it, but I would highly encourage you to go back and watch that. But one thing you briefly touched on was the difference between equality and equity. Yeah. So can you explain that?
Yeah. I think equality is more or less like, hey, I can do this just like you can do this, right? You can have that, I can have that, right? There's equality, nothing separates what we have access to. Equity is more long, it's more complicated, it's over time, it costs something. So it's like if you're building equity within your home, it's something that happens over time. And so it's like an investment over time. So equity costs the other side something, right? So it's like, and it goes on in this conversation about sharing power. It's like you can never create new power. It's just who holds more of it at one point in time. So the thing is like in order to truly create equity, power has to be shared. In order for it to be shared, it has to go from one place to another. It's always about reallocation. And so that's a conversation that is tough to have because it's like, what does that look like in like Black and white community? What does that look like in like any other diverse communities across the nation, you know, and stuff like that? It's like there are very severe issues of equity happening where who wants to, especially when we spend most of our time, the whole idea of the American dream is to amass more wealth, to build more things, so we can protect those things with what we have. You know, it's like, it's funny. It's like one of the greatest ways you can tell somebody's wealth is by how much insurance they have, you know, how much they have to protect the things that they've gained. Equity is the complete opposite of that. Equity, like creating an equitable world, says, I'm willing to give this up so that somebody else has an equal opportunity and chance that I have or that I had, you know? And so stepping into those conversations saying like, hey, person with a lot of power, do you mind sharing some of it? I think a lot of times, no matter what color your skin is, when you're asked to give up the power that you have, it's always a tough thing. That's like Jesus with the rich young ruler. He says, if you want to follow me, sell everything, give it all to the poor. And we see in that story, rich man walked away. Yeah. And so I think a lot of times we're walking away when Jesus is saying, be willing to give up everything. That's how you create equity.
And that's why, like you were talking about, the Holy Spirit is so important, because I just think of my life and I think of like, I don't think that way. That is not my natural bent. Like, what can I give up so that someone else can experience? Like, that is God doing a work in your heart, because our natural bent is, like you said, how can I acquire more? How can I keep the power, the possessions, whatever it is that I have? And so I think for a lot of us, maybe we've just never stopped to consider, like, there's so much that's in my hands that I have the ability to give away so that someone else can experience something that they've never had the opportunity to experience. And so I just am like so amazed and inspired by what you're doing, humbled that we kind of get to know you and walk beside you and see the difference that you're making, because I do, like, when I look at your story, when I look at your girls' faces, I do have hope, and I think like I believe God is doing something, even though like this last year has felt so dark. Like, he is waking up people that I think have never really opened their eyes to some things before. And so if we could all just consider, like, what is it that I have that I could begin to give away, that I could begin to share, so that we experience justice, wholeness, healing. Like, it may never be gone completely, but what God could allow us to experience here on earth, I think, is amazing. Any final words that you would say? I know I hit you with the big question at the end.
No,
talking about equity and equality, but
no, that's great. I just say, like, I think we just realize we all have something. We all have something. No matter how much power you have or you don't have, you have something. This is the beautiful thing about God is like he places each of us on this earth, and there's nobody like any one of us. We're all uniquely designed and created, and we all have different sets of gifts and talents and all kinds of things. There's so much. So the question I always ask people is like, what do you have? What has God given you? How do you leverage it? How do you leverage it for humanity? I think the disconnect, like we've talked about, is a lot of times we leverage it for self-glory and advancement. So how do we reframe that? Because it doesn't matter what color you are or anything like that. You have something, and there's a way that you can advance humanity through it. And like I said on Sunday, I think it starts with engaging with things that are different than you. It is engaging with full picture, the full humanity of God's beautiful creation.
Yeah. And what's like amazing to see with what you're doing with your girls this month, and I know is an ongoing thing for you, it's like, if you're a parent or whoever you have influence with, like, we have such an ability, an opportunity to teach this at a young age, like what you're saying, to teach your kids to ask, what do I have and how can I leverage it for humanity, are like two questions that we should all be asking ourselves and then teaching to the people that we influence. And what could change if we would begin to just ask those two questions?
That's it. That's it
amazing.
Right there. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jalen. I'm so grateful for our time with you. You have to, I'm sure we'll put a link, but you have to follow what Jalen is doing, especially Saria. We want to see what you're doing, but to see Cadence and Carrington, you've got to see it. So, but thank you for being with us today.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. I mean, I'm really grateful for you all and the whole East Town crew and what y'all are doing. I love it.
We love having you here in person for the first time, too.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So,
It's been great.
Thanks.
Yeah.